4, 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call this session for our Finance Committee workshop to order. Ms. Darlene, can you please establish a quorum for us?
Okay, I'm going to do the roll call. Chairperson Tyler,
Present?
President Galbraith,
Present.
Vice President Morgan,
Present.
Secretary Scott,
Present.
Board Member Tripp.
Present.
Chairperson Tyler, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Next, we need to approve the prioritized agenda.
It's Board Member Jeff Morgan. I make a motion to approve the prioritized agenda.
This is Board Member Noreen Scott. I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. All right, so the purpose of today's meeting is just for us to have a budget workshop and review. With us today is Michael Baker, David Vigil, as well as Heather Gobaldone. I'd also like to tell the public, thanks for bearing with us. We had a little bit of technical difficulties moving from one room to the other. Appreciate the staff's patience. I know you guys have been working really hard, so your patience is probably this big after the stress you guys have been under to prepare the budget for us today. So we're excited to get started. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike Baker, Chief Operations Officer. Thank you, Mike.
That's a great intro. I appreciate that. Really. Should I get up and start belting out a tune?
We did not know that was your walk-up sign, Mike. Good to know. Good to know.
Oh, boy.
Okay, so Madam Chair, Dr. Cleveland, members of the Finance Committee, what we have planned for this evening, first on the in regard to the 22-23 fiscal year operational budget, we will be presenting a budget overview that I will be presenting. It's kind of the 50,000 foot level of or view of the budget. After the budget overview, the Executive Director, David Vigil, he will review the revenue, specifically the 910B5 form, and that's where we get our SCG, or State Equalization Guarantee revenue. He will also review the other revenue sources to give you a clearer picture of where and how the district generates its revenue. From there, Executive Director Mike Chavez and Director Marissa de Aragon will go over allocations, and that is a review in regard to allocations of each school site and how we derive the student count and the teacher count to come up with our budget. And they'll go over it in quite detail, and you'll see the spreadsheets, and you have to your availability, you can peruse any of these documents that we're going over tonight by going into the budget 22-23 fiscal year in your Google Drive. From there, Director Heather Gobaldone will go over our salary and benefits. The number by far, the biggest number in the budget is salary and benefits. Any service organization, that's where the budget is. And Heather will be presenting a picture on that. Each section, I think what we'll do is as we go through each section, we'll stand for questions. And then at the end, we will stand for questions again. And so with that, we'll get started. So when you look at the operational budget overview, if you look into the green section where I have my cursor, so we will be generating approximately 202, 898, 526 in regard to total revenue. So just under $203 million. And as you can see under that, our SCG at about 185 is really the majority of that. Other sources come out to a little bit less than 1.5 million. And then you see our cash carry, or our beginning fund balance, is a little bit over 16 million. And so talking about that beginning fund balance, as you will, That is funding that we haven't spent in the current fiscal year, and those funds get carried over, and that assists us balancing the budget. The problem with this is that the money fluctuates from year to year, and so we do count on this carryover in order to balance our budget. The difficulty with that, however, is that if we have a low beginning fund balance, it could kind of interfere with our budget the following year. And so we try to keep an eye on that. We get a little nervous about that from time to time. This year was particularly interesting because we did receive such a large increase at mid-year in the amount of, it was a little bit over $7 million. That really did boost this cash carry. Over to the right of the green section, in the blue section, you can see that our total expenditures, again, is just under approximately $203 million. So at the moment, we are balanced. Now, I say at the moment we are balanced. This will change in 5 minutes. And all kidding aside, over the next week, we will continue to tweak the budget slightly because there are still changes that are coming down the pike, but essentially it's extremely minor compared to what we've already have documented. In total expenditures, you could see that the majority of our expenditures are salary and benefits, again, just under 158 million. Schools and departments, which are essentially our operations at the schools and at here district office, to exclude salary and benefits, just under $45 million. And you can see that this evening that we are balanced. As I go down the budget overview document, what we typically do is we review those mandatory budget adjustments that are established by the legislature and/or PED. This particular year, one and the same. And so the first thing that we do is when we do the budget is we do an analysis of what the legislature passed, what the governor signed, and what PED is going to enforce. And a snapshot of this is the first thing that we did this year. It was a little bit different than most years, and that is the legislature passed a 3% salary increase on the fourth quarter earnings to be paid this fiscal year. So essentially what it amounts to is 0.75% of someone's annual salary. That is noted as essentially a retention payment, and the purpose that the legislature presented on that was that they wanted to retain employees, and they thought by giving employees a raise sooner rather than later would help in this retention. And so we are going through that process currently. As you can see, it will be costing the district a little bit over $1 million. We did get a specific memo from PED. We are receiving somewhere in the neighborhood of about $970-something thousand in order to pay for this. So the revenue that's generated is very close to what our expenditure is going to be. The next set of,
Excuse me, Mr. Baker, could you
yes.
repeat what they, 900 and what?
it was something like $970-something
Okay.
thousand. Yes.
Jeff, go ahead.
Finance Committee member,
No, that's what I was going to ask, but you don't have the exact number on it.
pardon?
That's what I was going to ask. What was that exact number, but you don't have it?
We can get it.
Thank you.
So I know that you say, well, why didn't they pay us 100%?
Yeah.
And the reason why is because some of our positions we put in the teacher category. So teachers are either tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And what we do is our ancillary employees, we put them on the teacher schedule. Counselors are on the teacher's schedule. So we're not required to do that, but we do that for retention purposes and recruiting purposes. So that's why the numbers don't align exactly. I hope that makes sense.
It does, thank you.
Mike, I see 6% for medical benefits increase.
Yes.
Did all the other insurances go up too? Is that going to be later on in the presentation?
The property and liability insurance did go up. I don't.
But
Exactly.
everything went up.
Everything always goes up.
Yeah, but it was 6% for medical benefits.
Yes.
Okay.
6% to the district, and I believe 6% to the employee as well. The next set of raises, and we were very fortunate this year, obviously, for the state to, the state increased its revenue dramatically, and fortunately, so did public schools. And their focus was, again, teacher retention and teacher recruitment. And so there was a lot of the funding went into increasing the minimums. And so the next set of raises that the legislature issued out was a 4% raise that would be effective essentially July 1. And then for those districts that were engaged in extended learning time program, those districts received an additional 3%. And so when you kind of do a step by step, and the way the legislature actually issued it out, we actually have a situation where it's kind of compounding. So step 1 is 3%, step 2 is 4%, and step 3 is another 3%. So when you actually compound that out, the minimum salary increase essentially is 10.33%. And so we took that into consideration. And although this is not final because we still have to vet this through the union. And so Executive Director Chavez has a meeting set up with the union tomorrow to review this. And so that, and then lastly, is those employees that are under $15 per hour need to come up to $15 per hour. And so that entire package is just under 22 million. And then the legislature also, in order to make ERB solvent, added a 2% increase in the district's contribution, which comes out to about $2.3 million. And then the medical benefits is additional $588,000 cost to the district. So those mandatory budget additions are costing the district approximately $24.5 million, which is by far the majority of the, I'll call it, new money that we got from the legislature this year.
Excuse me, how much new money did we get?
We got approximately, and I'm going to answer it in kind of two ways. If you look at the beginning SCG from the beginning of the fiscal year, which was approximately, I'm going to put this on the screen, and
Keeps going in and out.
No longer getting.
okay. So beginning of the fiscal year, our SCG was right just below 155 million. This year, it's 185 million. However, every year in January, PED, they reset the unit value.
Mhm.
And so that's why we got about a $7 million increase, which is a pretty significant increase at mid-year. Usually the unit value fluctuates a little bit. This year it fluctuated considerably. So you'll see approximately $30 million in new money. That may be a bit misleading because of that mid-year payment.
Okay.
Madam Chair, can I just add one
Yes.
thing to that while they're working on that? In the past, there's been this push and pull between how much money to let out and how much to hold back. And we've had over the years secretaries that swing both ways. Last year, they held a lot back, and therefore we didn't get that money until very late. There have been some years it's been very hard then to expend it and to get it out and all of that. This year, the secretaries made a decision to go the other direction. And so we're letting far more money out. We won't be able to count on any extra money of any significance coming in mid-year. The only money that we're hoping will come in mid-year may be a transportation adjustment because everybody is short in terms of transportation. So that's just something to be aware of. It's nice when you get it in January or February when you've got a lot of outstanding things, but then you think of all the things you didn't put in, you would have and would have benefited from the entire year. So that's a call on the part of each secretary, how far they want to go. But this year, most of the money was allocated out. The highest percentage they've done, I think he said, in 15 years. So that's good. But it also, we have to be more careful then because there won't be anything. But again, we are expecting, the secretary is expecting, we'll see if he gets it, a major adjustment in transportation after this session.
Good, good. Thank you, Dr. Cleveland. Back to you, Mr. Baker.
Okay, to continue, some of the significant changes to the budget for this year is, and one of the things that we did before we opened up Joe Harris Elementary, we knew that that was going to, have a pretty significant impact on our budget. So what we did is a couple of years before we opened up that school, we took some of our budget and we set it aside in order to help open up that budget or open up that school. This way our budget wouldn't get necessarily killed in one year. So we're doing a little bit of the same with CTE this year. We're going to set aside $500,000, anticipating that the operational cost will be approximately $2 million next year when we open up that facility. Some of the other not necessarily changes, but big items, software and computers kind of lead the field as far as costing us more and more every year. Our software cost is approximately $3.3 million. Our IT department saw a fairly substantial increase this year. And one of the reasons why is we're centralizing where all the software is housed, number one. And number two is cybersecurity. We're putting a lot of security into the network. And you turn on the TV and somebody is getting hacked. There's this ransom stuff going on. APS got hit, Bernalillo County got hit, Las Cruces got hit, and obviously it's devastating. We're trying to put the money up front in order to make our system more secure, and so there is obviously a cost to that. So our IT department operational budget is approximately $4.5 million. Unfortunately, our transportation deficit continues to climb. This year, we estimate it will be a bit over $1.8 million. With fuel continuing to go up, that number could climb even more. Instructional material. This year, the legislature really didn't put enough money in instructional material. And so essentially we're basically doubling what we have to pay this year in instructional material at a cost of a little bit over $3 million. And then finally, unfortunately, I feel Google basically holds us hostage, and that in order to make sure that we have good service, a secure service, and quick service, we have to continually update our software and we have to continually update our devices. And so that is at a cost of approximately $2.3 million in new Chromebooks that will go to our students. So that is a snapshot of our budget overview. Before we move on, are there any questions?
I have one question on the personnel costs, but it might be explained later, so I'll hold the question for now.
I have one question, Mike, and that you made a comment that we need to add 2% to help the ERB become sovereign. I know the legislators added money to make the ERB sovereign, but I think it's still short. And I didn't know if that's kind of just information, if you know what the ERB is looking at long-term in order to be really actually sovereign, if all that makes sense.
Yeah,
That whole comment.
at the budget workshop, I know I went to one of the sessions concerning ERB. And so they're focused on having 100% solvency. And so the way it stood was that in 45 years, it would be 100% solvent. This adjustment right now, it brings it down to 33 years.
33, okay.
33 years.
Thank you.
I think it is important though, and you see every time in the audit that we carry a liability for that.
Mhm.
And so if the state did not step up, we would have some liability for our share of it and significant dollars. There really does seem to be, though, Gary, a move among legislators to get that cleaned up, and hopefully they will. And
Yeah.
hopefully that will get
And-
resolved.
Yeah.
The other is, of course, the legislators say they put the full 2% in the budget this year, but we haven't quite been able to find it, I don't think. But certainly they did put some money for employers to pay the match, but most districts have looked at it, it doesn't come close to covering even the 2% for this year. And I don't know if you all want to add anything to that, but it's needed. And I think everyone realizes if we don't do it, then you're going to kick that can down the road and it's going to be even worse later.
Mhm.
So we definitely need to move into to getting it solvent. I just want to say, this for the staff, and they're going to go ahead and present the rest of this. Every year is a hard year for budget. Every year we think it's going to be smoother than the year before, and we think we're going to get there, and it just doesn't happen. But for the staff this year, this was a true puzzle of putting the parts together. People had to work hours and hours to even understand what was needed. One of the challenges in New Mexico, and I'm sure you all know it, is our budgets come almost exclusively from the state of Santa Fe, from the city of Santa Fe, the state capital. In a lot of other states, each district determines the budget, and that's not the way it works here. So, we have to wait for them. But their biggest challenge in terms of budget for school districts is interpreting what the legislation actually said. And Mike was sharing with me, we had one memo from the secretary that said one thing. They had a presentation of the school budget workshop that was a little different. And then last week, they got a third letter from one of the deputies that said something different still. And so it's that process of trying to actually interpret the legislation. Other districts, other places don't go through that process.
Mm.
And that's what makes it a very difficult one. Because it's just, you have to make sense of legislation to determine your budget rather than just look in the bank and see how much money you have, if that makes sense.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Cleveland. Any other questions from members of the board before we continue? No. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Madam Chair, we will now move to revenue, my favorite subject, actually. And Executive Director David B. Hill will be presenting on the 910B5 form SCG. So,
Can you make it a little bit bigger for
sure
us?
can.
And then scroll to the left. Or, yeah, we can't see the left-hand side. So or you might just need to minimize it.
Well, they're getting that. One of the,
That's
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I was at a conference last week, and one of the districts that was there had written, had paid $2.5 million for ransomware to get their records back. $2.5 million. That's what they paid. So the security issue was a really real threat. And the thing that they were talking about is school districts are deemed to be easy targets. as compared to some other organizations. So now we really gained favor with this ransomware group, trying to get money. We think school districts are an easy target. So we're really lucky with the security team we have here, things that they put in place, Paul and Lee and others, to make sure we don't get hit. But they were saying that $2.5 million was just so hard in their budget to lose. It was really hard.
Madam Chair, Dr. Cleveland, members of the Finance Committee. My name is David V. Hill. I'm the Executive Director of Finance for the district. You'll excuse my voice, I'm a little hoarse too. The first document you're going to look at is just to give you some highlights of the revenue that came out of the legislature. House Bill 2 appropriated $3.85 billion for public school support. That includes a $64 million additional revenue to provide additional salary increases for extended learning programs. This is also called a statewide program cost for public education, or the amount that's above the line in terms of above the line funding. This 3.85 billion is the pot of money from which our SCG is derived, state equalization guarantee. This year we got 185 million in SCG for, as Mr. Baker presented earlier, that was a 14.4% increase over FY22. In determining what our additional piece of that 64 million is, they took our proportional share of the statewide program cost and applied it to the 64 million, which gave us about 3.2 million in additional funds to provide for a 3% increase for ELTP salaries. Just quick note, SCG makes up 99.1% of all operational revenues. So as we go down the other revenues here on the table below, you'll see SCG and you'll see everything else in it, and it's pretty minimal. But and again, Mr. Baker was talking about it earlier, and that timing for the money that came over in the mid-year. But as the budget was adjusted in February, as we got that additional 7 million, that is reflective of an increase of 22.2 million over this current school year. So again, it's 30 million, but it was only 22 since the budget was adjusted now in January and February. So you'll just see underneath there's a table that shows all of the additional revenues, but you'll see about halfway down or 2/3 of the way down, you'll see that the 185,252,000 that is part of this year's SCG, as opposed to next year's SCG, as opposed to last year's or this current year's SCG at 161,900,000. The other big pieces of the pot there are local tax revenue. If you scroll up just a little bit, Mike, sorry. You'll see your local property tax revenue, about 750,000. We have payment in lieu of taxes about halfway down of about 260,000. And the other big piece of the other significant piece of other revenue is indirect costs. So we take a portion of federal grants for administrative costs, and that is about 350,000. So in total, we have, as Mr. Baker reported earlier, about 886 million for operational revenue for this year. So if you go down, we wanted to talk about the Scg funding formula, and I wanted to break it down in its major pieces. So because it's very complex, and I just wanted to break it down so that it feels like it's a little bit easier to understand. But I broke it down to 5 different components here. We have the membership, and that really is all the student enrollment. We have the teacher cost index, which used to be the training and experience index, and they blended those two indexes or multipliers over the last 4 years. This is the first year where we're using the teacher cost multiplier solely to generate additional program units. And if I can just roll down here, so just real quickly, if you look down here, the program cost calculation, or the SCG calculation, is your grand total program units times the unit value equals the SCG. And it seems very simple, but how you determine all those program units is where it gets very complicated. But it's driven by, like I said, the membership and the teacher cost multiplier to begin with. All of the special programs to include special ed, art, bilingual PE, you can see so on and so forth, and the extended learning programs. So that is all driven by the membership or enrollment in those programs times their individual cost factor. That equals additional program units. There's an at-risk multiplier that takes the total basic membership of the district and multiplies it by that at-risk factor to provide additional program units. And then you get additional program units for growth.
I don't know what it is, but I have no sound on mine.
Not my phone.
Well, thank you for, I appreciate it. It wasn't as cool as Mike's.
It sounds like it's coming out of here.
Is it coming from everybody?
Yeah, I was like,
Everybody's went out.
yeah, it's got an interesting beat. Yeah, they're even going out more than the TVs are in and out.
Maybe turn them off so they don't.
Yeah,
make
just
noise.
turn it off and turn it back on.
Maybe a friend's introduction or something better than.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, we should probably go ahead and move them off for now. They were working in
Okay.
here.
Turn them off or?
Yeah, I think so. It's probably for the best.
There's nothing.
Oh, is that dead too? I thought maybe it was the HDMI port that was.
So for live streaming purposes, we can maybe just take a short IT break to get it so that we're able to see the presentation again. So just bear with us, please.
They can still see us. The requirement is to be able to be heard and seen, but we're still on.
You want to do 5 minutes?
Yes, but we can't see.
Yeah, let's do a 5
Okay.
minutes. You want to tell John to?
We can't see the
pause our
Oh,
presentation.
okay, that's right. You didn't get a copy of this
No,
printed.
no.
I see.
And if we take a minute, we could all get it up and
Yeah.
scroll along.
Got
We
it.
just need to know exactly where you guys are at. So I'm fine with that. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break so that we can get our individual computers up and log into our share drive so that we can follow along with the presentation.
Okay.
So the shared drive will be budget,
Operational sheet.
it will say budget 22, 23 fiscal year.
Okay, once you've got yours.
Are you pulling it on board with or are you doing it? It's not on board work. Let me see if you're actually. Okay. So you'll need to sign into your account.
Sorry. Okay, you could probably turn the screens back on now, maybe.
What do you think was going on?
Sorry about the flickering.
We're
They're working on stuff in the room just the past couple days because they didn't know we were streaming.
Yeah, mine's still making noise.
Yeah, never mind.
So if they tell us different areas to go, like before we were on operational
There it goes.
sheets, now we're gonna be on revenue. Sometimes if you X out of it, it'll take you.
Still
totally
making
out.
noise,
Go back to
though.
my driver, just tap, off of you. Okay. So revenue summary.
Yeah, you might leave it off. I don't know if you can hear it. It's still making a fuzzy noise.
Okay,
We can get.
so just leave it off.
Yeah, I can put
Okay.
Standing by, we are still live.
I need to keep mine on to make sure we're broadcasting. I'm getting everything.
Yeah.
We're
and
still live.
We are still live.
Yeah, then I'm watching that, and someone's supposed to watch that and make sure we get the.
Okay.
What folder?
The shared with me, like we were before.
So I'm good. I'm in the budget. I just don't know which.
Oh,
they are.
revenue.
And revenue. then revenue.
Oh, it just went off again. Tyler, it just went off.
And we got the,
Oh, okay.
I have no idea
Okay.
you want to get Jeffrey up on his?
Yeah, I can. I don't know. And I can get Gary.
Oh, it has to be on that one. He doesn't have a computer, so you can share.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there more back there? Oh, no, is there more?
Water?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I'm good. I've got, I have my Amanda.
I'm good.
Thanks, my pleasure.
Being a lot better.
Does it work? I mean, if it stays working, I won't have to.
Okay, if not, if it stops working, I'll share it with Gary. Okay. All right, give Gary just a second.
So Jeff, are those computer glasses you're wearing?
Yes.
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 I've heard those are really handy.
They are.
Yeah.
Okay, our apologies for more technical difficulties, but that's what happens when you get new equipment. So we'll go ahead and go back to you instructing us on the formula. Thank you.
Which is very interesting. Thank you for explaining it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Secretary Scott. Yeah, my idea was to break it down. We're going to go through the worksheet itself, and it gets very complicated. You see a lot of numbers, but this is kind of your cheat sheet you go back to, and you can say, okay, this is how all of those pieces come together, so that it comes up with what ends up at the number at the bottom. I think we were at the at-risk multiplier, and so you take all of your basic K-12 enrollment, you multiply that by that at-risk index, and that provides those additional units for the calculation. And finally, we were at growth. So for many, many years, the Rio Rancho has been in a growth pattern. So that growth, if you grow more than 1% from the prior year, you generate growth units. And that growth units you get to project out. It's one of the very few items in the SCG formula that actually gets adjusted mid-year. So they'll take a look at our actual 40-day number, and if it's higher or lower, adjust the number of units and fund you on that. So when the district has projected growth in the past, you have to be very careful about how much growth, because if you overproject the growth and you sign a lot of contracts, and then that funding gets pulled back because you didn't hit your growth number, that can be harmful to the district. On the flip side, if you don't project growth with some accuracy, then now you've underfunded the district. Now you haven't hired the staff, and now you have all these kids that need services, and we haven't done our due diligence to do that. So it's really important that when we project growth, that we do it with accuracy. This year, however, we don't have to worry about that because we are not projecting growth in the district.
And I have a quick question. Were we conservative also for last year's budget? I'm assuming, I know there was concern because of enrollment numbers being down across the state after COVID. So
I believe.
did we do the same last year?
Yeah, Madam Chair, we did estimate our growth, and we actually came pretty close, I believe it was about 3.6% coming out of the COVID. So yeah, we did, and we did project that. We did put that in our SCG, and we did receive the growth dollars.
Thank you. And I have one other question on the formula. So if a student is counted in basic membership, are they then not counted for if they're a special program member? So they're not counted twice, or does the special program member, for like, say we had 100 students out of 1,000, would they be counted? How does that factor work?
Yes.
If that makes sense.
And I
Sorry.
can show you that in the spreadsheet here coming up. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you, Madam Chair. So at this point where you see the solid line, generally that would be the end of all of the additional, or everything that derives the revenue. So you add the letters B, C, D, and E for all of the units that were generated by all of those pieces, and you get your grand total program units. Once you get your grand total program units, the state assigns what the unit value is for that year. And you multiply all of those grand total program units against the unit value, and that's your SEG. This year's a little bit different in that they provided an additional $64 million for the extended learning program. And as I mentioned earlier, we generated about $3.2 million in additional funding. So that gets added to our SEG. And so you'll see there at the bottom, and that's where that final 185 million comes from. So that's the SEG calculation in a nutshell. Okay. So I provided in the budget binder, I've provided the SEG document by itself so you can look at it, but it's on this document so that we can just move seamlessly through it. So as I mentioned earlier, so this is the SEG calculation that comes straight from the PED, and you'll see it's 3 pages long, and you'll see at the bottom in purple, you'll see our total amount, $185,252,180.74.
Okay, and you might have to tell us what page you're on because we can't see your presentation anymore. So when you're scrolling down, if you can just tell us what page and where you're at, that would be helpful for us. Thank you.
Sorry about that. So yeah, so there's three pages following that summary sheet. And so on the final page, that third page of the document, there'll be a field that's in purple. And in purple, it will show the total SEG amount for the district.
Excuse me, I have a question. Right above that, it says charter school administration withholding. Because we have no charter schools in this district, is that why it's 0?
That's correct.
So what would it look like if we had a charter school?
If you had a charter school, the district can take up to 2% of their generated program cost. And nowadays it's called program cost back in the day. Now it's just their SEG. So you can withhold 2% of their SEG for administrative costs if there is a charter school that's authorized by the district.
Oh, only if it's authorized by the district.
Only if it's authorized by the district.
Otherwise, if it's authorized by the state, then we would never see it.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Can I add one thing to that? Because I think it's really important for the board
Yes,
to
please do.
know. Is historically, one of the reasons why the Rio Rancho district has not authorized charters, and the charters that exist here, and we have 3 of them in the community, are state charters, is because the district then assumes some responsibility over their budget, their audit, and other, but has 0 input in terms of how that charter is operated. And so historically, our board has said if we don't have any say over how things are done, or but yet we're responsible, we really didn't want that responsibility. And so that's why some districts do as we've done, and they're chartered by the state. The Albuquerque Public School District has a very different view about that, and they authorize those charters themselves. And you can argue back and forth. There are pros and cons both ways. But that's why we do have 3 charters in Rio Rancho, but they're not Rio Rancho Public School charters.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cleveland.
Thank you, Dr. Cleveland. So starting on page 3 of 5 of this document, you'll see the first page of the SEG calculation. And the first section of this is the basic program K through 12. And so you'll see the grade totals there in green. The next column over is your cost index. And so that is the multiplier by which you multiply all of your membership or enrollment to get the number of program units generated for that grade. And you can see that they range from 1.045 up to 1.44. So the green section shows that you have total membership of 16,779 students, which generate a total of 20,213 units. Okay. As we scroll down a little bit farther down, you can see, and this will get to Madam Chair's question on the special education membership, but you'll see that underneath that you have the staffing cost multiplier, and this year our staffing TCI, the teacher cost index, is 1.074. So what happens is you multiply all of your total basic membership program units, the 20,213, you multiply that against the 1.074, and that provides additional program units based on the teacher cost index. And that teacher cost index is based on the licensure level and the years of experience for our teaching staff. Okay.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yes, ma'am.
Each child is generated individually. So let's say you're just a fourth grade child, just a straight average fourth grade kiddo, then you may be a 1.0 unit. But you're a child with a severe disability, you may get 3 times that much based on that. Still doesn't cover the cost of special ed, unfortunately, but it's each child is calculated different. A high school student generates more than an elementary student does. And that's all part of a formula that the state has put together. One of the challenges that we have is that a lot of finance folks have, school business officials have looked at it over the last several years and don't believe those weighted units really actually reflect costs anymore. And so there really is probably a need to revisit that. But a kindergarten child, for example, generates more because state statute requires that every kindergarten have an educational assistant in it. So therefore they get an extra bump. So it's every child is individually calculated in this formula. And then the 2 other kind of quick things is you know very well as a board, we get less money than most other districts. We're really toward the bottom. A couple of those things that have been talked about today. One is the at-risk indicators, much smaller for the Rio Rancho district than some. The other, which is something we're going to be sharing with you, we're working on, but it is the relative inexperienced number, the high number of inexperienced teachers that we have in the district. And so that training and experience is less. And some districts have far more senior folks, and therefore they get paid for that. So both of those are a couple of factors as to why our budget is less than other districts of comparable size.
So thank you, Dr. Cleveland. So if you think of the TCI index or that staffing cost multiplier, and you're taking into consideration what Dr. Cleveland said in terms of having a lower experienced staff, you're going to see that TCI index, that teacher cost index, be smaller. And so you'll see the 1.074 in the cream colored cell here. You can basically what you can derive from that is that you have an additional 7.4% additional units based on that teacher cost factor. So the higher that factor is, it may be as high as 1.09, but 1.09 is 9% as opposed to 7% additional units. So it is a driver of those units and funding, the associated funding. Underneath that is your special education numbers. So you'll see that you have the level C and C gifted, level D and D gifted, 3 and 4 year old special ed, and then the AB MEM gifted. And so those are multiplied by the cost factors on the right hand side of 1.0, 2.0, 2.0, and 0.7 respectively. And then right underneath that is your adjusted ancillary FTE. Ancillary FTE is our staffing numbers, so those are not children. So we have 135.87 ancillary staff that are calculated for our funding. And so you'll notice that the funding factor, the cost factor associated with the ancillary staff on the right-hand side is 25.00. It's a huge number, right? So the number of service providers for our special ed children generates quite a bit of units for the district. So you'll see that total special education units are 7,525, okay? You multiply that by the unit value, you get a number that is derived for special ed, okay? Underneath this next section, I talked about the special programs. So you'll see things like elementary fine arts. You'll see things like bilingual. Farther underneath, you'll see extended learning. Again, those are all based on enrollment, again, multiplied out by those cost factors. So for instance, elementary fine arts is 8,619 children enrolled times the cost factor of 0.05. And so going across, you can see those special programs. Underneath, you'll see, let's see, what else? Growth. Here's the growth calculation box. You can see here in our growth calculation box, this is on page 4 of 5, that we had 2021, 2022 40th day actual MEM of 16,831. And again, we projected no growth under the cell underneath, 16,830. So it generates no growth units for the district. Yes.
Question on national board certified teachers.
Yes, ma'am.
Does that mean we have 31 teachers in our district who are national board certified?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
And is that something that we get paid extra for because they are?
Yes, we do get paid extra, and it's actually a pass-through because those teachers receive exactly what that funding generates, goes directly to that teacher.
So is it more than the regular salary?
It is, what is it, 1.5? I think it's a factor of 1.5 times the unit value. So each teacher gets 1.5 units times the unit value, and that goes directly to the teacher.
Do we have a program to encourage national board certified teachers?
I'd like to let Mike Chavez kind of address that issue, that it's not quite as simple as it sounds. Nothing is.
Take the mic.
You're a mic. You don't need a mic.
I don't need a mic. I probably don't really need the microphone, but good afternoon, Chairperson Tyler, Dr. Cleveland, and members of the board. National boards is a very interesting thing. It is a for-profit organization, and so we have kind of gone back and forth with whether we support them 100%. We do have folks in our district, however, we have a couple of different programs that we can talk about, and I talked about it a little bit last time. We have coaches right now who coach people on the dossier program, which is to help our folks advance from one level to another. The purpose of the national boards is that in lieu of having a master's degree, you can advance to level 3 without having a master's degree if you have national board certification. There is a group at the state who very much supports national boards, and you can tell that because we have a number of people who have received about a $6,500 stipend this year for having national board certification. The way that works is by the 40th day count, they must provide to the Human Resources Department a certificate, sorry about that, that shows that they hold the national board certification at that time, at 40th day. If they receive it after that, they won't get their stipend until the following year. But we do have also have some folks in the district who have within the past couple of years begun a program to support those who are interested in national boards as well. It's a little bit of a conundrum because we want to support our universities and our local schools and encourage people to get master's degrees. National boards also requires you to completely renew the national board certification every 10 years. So it's not something like a master's where you get it and it's yours for life. I'll stand for any other questions.
But just to make clarification, somebody could be a level 3 with a master's and still get their national board.
They
and
can
could
have
get a
both.
level
That-
3 salary from the state as
Absolutely.
well as the $6,500.
And we do have a number of people who do that because it's quite a nice stipend, to be quite honest. So.
Any other questions before we proceed? Sorry.
You know, I did want to add something, if that's okay, Madam Chair.
Yes, of course.
You know, one thing that mentioned, national board certification is a pass-through. And there's a dilemma between higher ed and a pro-profit conversation. But another issue that's in the state of New Mexico is, and Mr. Villa, I don't know how you would address this, but I would like you to address it, is there's so many districts that have emergency funding in the state of New Mexico. So where, for example, it may take $11,000 per student to educate a child for the school year. There's the state of New Mexico is giving small rural districts like Mosquito $33,000 per student in order to educate that child for the year. So the state of New Mexico we're a rural state, and every so often it comes up, how long can we afford this? You know, we have over 20 districts in the state of New Mexico that are receiving emergency dollars, and it hurts the overall budget in some respects. But the other thing it would do is it would devastate and destroy a small community. So it's a pros and cons. But I think that the populace needs to know that we do have a lot of dilemmas. I know Dr. Clemens spoke about several of them. This is another one. But I don't know, Mr. Villa, if you can add, just for knowledge base, the emergency funding to rural districts in the state of New Mexico. I don't know if you can explain it way better than me, I hope.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp, for that question and comment. I think that in terms of emergency supplemental funding, there are several districts, like you said, that are on that funding year after year after year. And so what we've been told with our transportation dilemma is that you have a shortfall every year. You ask for emergency funding. They tell us it's not an emergency. And so for a lot of these smaller districts who are on emergency supplemental year after year after year, it's not an emergency. The funding formula doesn't work for them because they have such a small student population, but their fixed costs, they have a higher rate of fixed costs than someone like than a district like ours, and you have economies of scale. And so when we start looking at, we have a principal of Mosquito who has 47 students in it, and half of that is in elementary school. So you're talking a high school of 20 students, but the principal is required to make $98,000. You know, and so you have these fixed costs, you have these legislative mandates, and so what happens is their expenses cannot be covered by the amount of funding that they generate through the formula. And so that's what causes a disequalization statewide for some of these districts that have this emergency funding. It's what we run into here in the district with our transportation funding. So we have such a small geographic area, but yet we have a lot of students in this district. And what happens is now it's created a situation where the funding mechanism doesn't work for us because of the way that the formula is set up. And so in very much that same way that we are affected, and one of only a very few districts that have a transportation issue because of the funding mechanism is not set up correctly, we have this dilemma statewide. And so it's an issue that is not easily fixable because there needs to be political will in order to do that. So I'm the bean counter. I just run the numbers, but I can see your point in terms of having it disequalized in the state.
Madam Chair, but there is one major difference, I believe, and agree with everything that Mr. Vigil has said. We have a court decision, and Judge Singleton said they will pay transportation, and she did say they will pay instructional materials, both of which are not being paid for this district this year. And so I think it may be an issue to go back and take that back. Every year, the judge asks us if they have met the requirements of the decision. And so far every year we've had to say no, and I think we will have to say no again. The other is very interesting in the trial was the comment by, I believe, Judge Singleton. I'm not absolutely for sure on that, but she said that when you have all of these situations like Board Member Tripp is talking about, makes the best case ever that the formula doesn't work very well and that schools are underfunded. And so that we have a formula that isn't working particularly well. And we have a major court decision that said that needed to be remedied. And so far, that's not happened. One of the things I've learned through this process, and in talking with some of my colleagues from Washington State, who had a funding formula lawsuit a few years before we did, that winning the suit is just the first big step. And it generally takes several years before you're able to get everything compliant with that. And the key is, do the districts that are part of that have the will to continue until that's done? And I think that's a factor that we've got to continue to monitor, because and I've asked Lauren Hatch and David to begin to look at that, to see where we need to go. Her decision is very clear. Her decision says you will pay transportation.
Well, my question is, are there no repercussions? Is there no contempt of court or?
There can be, and the judge can. So far, the judge has wanted, again, it was as you probably are aware, Judge Singleton died tragically after the lawsuit, just very shortly thereafter. She had cancer and she was working literally nonstop to finish that decision before she died. And we, of course, didn't know that. No one knew that at the time. But when you then get a new judge, it takes that new judge a lot of time to come up to speed on everything. And there has been a willingness in the administration to try to deal with some of those issues. They just haven't gotten it done. And so, but the legislature also has to play a key role. And I think what we've seen in Washington State is sometimes legislators are not willing to make that change until there is a penalty, a financial penalty assessed. So, that's not where I hope we go. I hope we can get it figured out. And I hope that, but for the last 3 years, the state of New Mexico, in my opinion, has been in violation of that decision. And the other thing that might be a consequence is, to go back and ask for the 3 years that they didn't pay since the decision was rendered. But again, I don't even know if that's possible. And that's something that Lauren and David are need to check into. And we've generally up to this point gone always as a group of 5 districts. And whether now our needs are getting so different, we may need to veer off individually on some of those points. But at any rate, it's understand what that means for the children of Rio Rancho. It means that this year our transportation is short $2 million. What it means is $2 million comes right out of the classrooms in this school district. That's where it comes from. That's where it goes. And so children in other districts who are getting their transportation paid are getting that money, and they're using it for their supplies, materials, teacher salaries, and that kind of thing. The other is, to your point on the small districts that have that problem. What happens is, in effect, the state takes over their budget and they lose local control. And so the people in that community lose control over their budget and their school district, which is one of the reasons that one of the 5 districts that filed was Lake Arthur, which is a very small remote district, who raised the issue of the fairness of why they did not have total control over their budget, why they did not get sufficient money every year to be able to have the same flexibility and freedom of other districts. And it's just the formula has some quirks in it. It's the formula itself is designed to be very equitable. That was the whole purpose of it. But those on the bottom, whether it's us or Farmington or Hobbs, or and it changes from year to year based on the decisions that are made by the legislature. Sometimes we can be at the very bottom, other years we're not. We're a little bit higher. It's an interesting formula. The intent, it was a very honorable thing, which was to try to distribute resources fairly across the whole state of New Mexico, but it doesn't do it perfectly. And there's just some adjustments that we think need to be made as a result of it.
Who were the five litigants?
Pardon?
Who were the 5 litigants in the court case?
It was the 2 biggest districts were Santa Fe and Rio Rancho. And then the next kind of in the middle, Gallup was a key player. And of course, Gallup's real interest was more in the equity piece and a feeling that particularly underserved children their needs were not being met. And they have not only prevailed in that area, but also have now prevailed in impact aid. So they are in a much better situation. And then the other two were Moriarty Edgewood. And while they're very small, much smaller than we are, they have almost the same problems that just on on a smaller scale. And then Lake Arthur was the fifth. Those were the five main districts. Then the second, there was a set of districts that were kind of in a second tier of the lawsuit. And but they did not, they were part of the process, but were not part of the actual, they were actually not plaintiffs or defendants.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, may I continue?
Please do.
Thank you. I'll go through this. I think we're almost here at the end of the funding formula. So one of the bigger pieces is the at-risk unit. So it's right where my cursor is. At-risk unit is a rolling average. It's a rolling 3-year average of 3 data points. At-risk is derived from poverty, from English language learners, and from mobility. And so that data goes into that calculation to provide this at-risk index of 0.102. And so all of the basic membership that was counted at the top of the sheet is multiplied by that at-risk index to derive additional program units. So a couple of small factors that the district will encounter is a charter school student activities. Charter school students are eligible to participate in district activities, and so we get a small portion of revenue for those students, as well as homeschool students. So they can participate in district activities as well. So if you move down here, basically the rest of it doesn't really apply, but you'll see down here, finally, extended learning time. So here is a big driver of revenue for the district. Extended learning time, we have 16,639 students participating in extended learning time. Multiplied by the factor of 0.11, it generates 1,830 units. Again, and then we scroll over here and you'll see the unit value. So the unit value this year, the initial unit value is $5,450.92. So you multiply all of those units against the unit value, you get this 181,974,875. And then just to end up, we have this additional 3.2 million that I spoke about earlier for the 3% salary increase for those participating in ELTP programs. So you add that 3.2 million to the 181 million, and you get the $185,252,180.74. And that is our funding for the year.
I just have one quick question. Sorry. So the extended learning time program units, that's for the student factor. The additional 3.2 million is for teacher costs for salaries for the extended days. Is
that was the additional language in House Bill 2 saying that they got an additional 3% salary increase. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. With that, I stand for questions.
Could I ask, do you have, after you have the unit value, do you yet have the actual, what you think will be expenditure per student yet?
No, that, Dr. Cleveland, I think that report is done a little bit, a little farther on down the year. And so we don't have those numbers
Normally
quite
we
yet.
calculate at the beginning of the year just what we think approximately it will be.
Okay.
And I just didn't know if you had that yet. And it's fine if you don't. I just was kind of curious, after all these new things and add, what will it kind of look like per pupil? But that amount, just for the board's sake, is certainly the amount we'll spend per pupil is much higher than the 5,000. It will be considerably higher because, again, remember the units are weighted. And so that's fine.
Sure, Dr. Cleveland, and I'd be happy to run those numbers for you all and get them to you as soon as possible. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Beho.
All right, quick question on transportation since we're all hanging out here for a second. So, okay, so with that court case, I mean, could they just honestly look at our numbers and where we're a shortfall on that transportation and then just give us that money? I mean, could it be that simple where we're like, okay, we're short 2 million and this court case says that we should be funded that, and they say, okay, so here's that. Like, why, like, what makes it so complicated as far as paying out those funds that we are deficient on? I don't know if that makes any sense.
President Galbraith, I don't know that I'm the right person to ask that question. It's more of a legal question because it's a legal ruling. So, you know, when you're talking about that, it's one of those things where kind of above my pay grade. I don't know, Mr. Baker, can you?
Well, and from what I understand of what they stated before, especially on using the emergency funding for the state equalization funding factor, that they've been willing to make that concession from a state level. However, the state's not willing to make that concession for the same deficiencies within the formula for transportation, and then the court case would be totally separate. So I haven't seen the ruling, but it could be even that, no, the state is giving you funding just because it's not sufficient for you. Maybe, you know, they could say you're not managing your money correctly, or where it's an issue of more of geography as well as population within that geography. So that those formulas aren't going to, like they said, work for all of the different types of communities that fall within New Mexico.
Well, what the judge said was that you will pay transportation for students in New Mexico. And so it didn't say except in certain geographic areas or except for those that have density issue or whatever. And actually the discussion, probably the one that was the most animated was instructional materials. And you could tell that, you know, certainly Judge Singleton was a very well-educated person, and you could tell she was an avid reader by some of the things she said. And she saw the year that we got something like $5 for a textbook, you know, that, I mean, it was just ridiculous. And she said, it's not really very hard to figure out what a textbook costs and multiply that by every child. The other thing that's a real challenge on that is that you know, in districts that get more per pupil than we get, the book costs the same. So the book that we have to buy, that we're buying for English language arts, costs the very same for a district that may be getting more money. In the past, the state of New Mexico put instructional materials out of the formula. And the intent was to also, in the past, is transportation was outside the SCG. They have now moved instructional materials within the formula. Okay, so that just means that Rio Rancho will get less for instructional materials just because it has to flow through that formula. When in effect, a book should be a book. I mean, you just say, okay, the English adoption, the new materials cost this much. And they should then multiply that by the number of students that would need to get those materials. And that's how it should be done. In the past, and in a conversation with the secretary, I asked him, you know, if he remembered when he was the deputy under Veronica Garcia. And I said for a couple of things, but, you know, certainly in terms of instructional materials, you just simply wrote to the districts and said, how much will it cost? Figure out these and understand we can only buy books that the state has approved. So we don't get the opportunity to go out and just pick whatever books we want. I mean, we have to buy off the state adopted list. So you take the state adopted list and you multiply it by every student. And that's how much it costs. And we would send that up to Santa Fe, to PED, and they would pay that. And so it's as simple, really, as asking the districts, what will it cost? And I also remember at the time Secretary Garcia saying, you've got to be absolutely accurate, because if you overestimate it and ask us for more than you really deserve, I'll take twice back. So I don't know whether she could have really done that, but it was really effective with all of us because we made absolutely sure what we sent up there was absolutely accurate. But it's the same for things such as, the biggest one is salaries. In the past, as Mike Chavez can attest, they would send us worksheets and we would put down exactly what the salaries would cost. We would send it back up there with the understanding that some people will leave, other people will come. and it won't ever be exact. But it was pretty close. Those years were pretty close. It's the same for transportation. Diesel fuel costs the same in Rio Rancho right now as it does in Farmington or as it does in Clovis, and yet we're getting far less money to pay that bill. And for me, that's a fairness and an equity issue.
Mhm.
And the factor that we think is Mr. Vihil's the one that kind of pointed that out to us. He believed the factor was a density factor that not anyone in the state can explain why it's there. You talk to people and they can't explain it. But I don't know what you would argue, because the miles are the same, the riders are the same, the fuel costs are the same. And if anything, probably the wear and tear on your buses are greater in an urban area with stop and start, are very hard on school buses. The argument years ago was that the roads were bad in rural areas, and that's true. I mean, they do tear up your buses. That's certainly one of the factors. But that ought to be factored into the replacement of buses, maybe in a different way.
Mhm.
So it's just, it's not real hard to figure out what our transportation bill is. On top of that, just so some of you kind of know the history of it, we had 3 different people over time come down, and I said, if you can tell us, show us anything we're doing wrong, anything where we're not effective, where we're not efficient, where we could save money, every time they would leave and say, you have the best transportation system in the state. Okay, great. That's good to hear. But they couldn't give us any concrete ways that we could operate any cheaper than we were doing. And in fact, if anything, we were operating at a very high level of efficiency. So at some point, that bill needs to be paid. And I would argue that why should $2 million come out of the district, taking away from the children in this district when other districts are getting their transportation paid? And we are not alone. It's a factor for the Las Cruces schools as well. They're kind of in, not as much as we are, but they are also challenged with the transportation. So your second and third largest districts can't get their transportation bills paid. Some years Albuquerque has been able to pay it, and some years they have not. Right now, it's not a few districts. So at our superintendent's meeting, the number of districts that are upside down for transportation has grown significantly.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've got to get it fixed. I mean, they just do, because it's coming out of salaries, benefits, instructional materials, things that every district needs. And we already get the least out of that. So that's just a little bit of background, a little bit of history. But I think the ruling is very clear in what she said, that said it should be paid.
David has something new. Go ahead, David.
Chairwoman Tyler, President Galvin, there may be some value in the legal department doing a closed session to brief Yazzie Martinez where it stands, and then that way we could probably get into more in depth in where it stands and what we could do going forward.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those remarks, Dr. Cleveland. Okay, we're ready to proceed. Sorry.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Dr. Cleveland, members of the Finance Committee. My name is Marisa de Aragon. I'm the HR Director for Data and Analytics. And what we're looking at today is an example of how we compute allocations at the school site. As Mr. Baker said, all of the school site allocations are available in the board binder folder if you want to take a look at them. The school site we are looking at today is Colinas del Norte. And this process is a fairly lengthy process. We start in about February looking at where we are currently in the year and then trying to project out student enrollment for the following year. What you're looking at in the peach colored, that's the current year. So at the very top, you're going to see projection used, which is 615. That was the projection of students we used to calculate the allocations for the current school year for 2021. And then we track any changes we make throughout the year at 80-day and 120-day. And then as we start to build allocations for the coming year, we look at what the allocation was at 120-day and how that matches up with the actual staff they hired or had on board at 120-day. Then we work with IT to get projection information out of PowerSchool, which looks at next year, next grade. So basically rolling up students to the next grade. The real, kind of unknown is kindergarten. And we try to estimate that as best as we can based on historical numbers. So as we move into the blue shaded area, that's where we move into the projections, and you'll see A, B, and then a total number, which is general ed students. And then we look at A, B, C, and D. And the formula takes into account the state PTR. So it'll look at, how many number of students you can have per classroom based on that teacher ratio, pupil teacher ratio. And then for A, B, C, and D students, it looks at the caseload maximums that are given to us by the state. So for example, an A level student would require 0.017 FTE. So it looks at all of that, and then it creates that adjusted total for student population. And then based on that, we get a number of teachers required. So like in kindergarten, we're saying this coming year, we're gonna need 5 teachers. So we start with that as a base using the formulas. Then we get together as a committee and look at other factors, like does this school have a small group or a cluster program that might require additional resources? Is there a reason that we might need additional EAs to support those programs? General ed and special ed are based on the formulas for the most part. Once we get into the support staff, EAs, those are on a case-by-case basis. We have to look at that school, what's happening at that school, and that's where the SIOs, our school improvement officers, help out with that and really, give us the school story. Then there's other factors that come into play, like title allocations. If we scroll down on this particular sheet, you'll see that title allocations are 0 right now because we don't know what the federal budget will look like. So those numbers will come later, and these will get revised again and provided to the principals. But this is a starting point for us as we look at the budget. So once these have all been done for every school site, then we look at the total allocations at the school site. What is it going to look like from where we are? We use 120-day as the base because we know what we've added throughout the year, and then we look at how many additions are we going to have for the coming year. And we can go through this as much detail as you want. Like for example, special content, art, music, we'll work with fine arts department to understand what some of those changes might be. Special ed, we work closely with the special services department to find out what some of those factors are that might come into play that are outside of the formula.
Go ahead. Yes, please.
Sure.
Yes.
28.4 fifth grade average. Just looking at things that highlight to me, that seems higher than the allowed pupil teacher ratio at the state.
So the reason for that is there was actually a reduction made at each elementary school last year to add support staff elsewhere. And there wasn't any rhyme or reason from why we took it from any particular grade, because outside of kindergarten, all GE is lumped together. We only break it down on these allocation sheets for the principal's purpose. But in terms of human resources, when they're hired, they're all in one category as general ed. We don't know what grade. So that overage, or that, looks like it's really high there, was to create that position in support staff.
Madam Chairperson, Dr. Cleveland, members of the Finance Committee, let me answer that a little bit. Just like Dr. Cleveland said a minute ago, we really, we are projecting, Marisa said, we're projecting our student enrollment from year to year. We don't have necessarily a absolute picture of what children will be at each school in the fall. So what we do is we project from the students that are here this year, we roll those students up to the next grade, we roll those students up to the next school, and then it's up to the principals in the fall to readjust their staffing as needed based on, for example, they may not get nearly the number of kindergartners that we anticipate, and they may move a kindergarten teacher down into the 1 through 5 grades, or they may have all the third graders may move away. We've had that happen. We've had schools where, suddenly they have little teeny tiny third grade classes and they reduce the number of teachers in that grade level and they move them into another area. If it were absolutely necessary, and our first choice would be to certainly look at the other schools and see if there's a place where we can do some shifting and not have to add more teachers to the district, particularly in a year where we're pretty tight on our budget. We would look around and see if there's some place where we might shift allocations. But we certainly do look very carefully. The difficulty is that we have a lot of parents who don't go in and do their final registration or notify the school that they're leaving until very late in the summer. And so a lot of our principals are still operating on numbers that they have from the year before. And we're waiting. It's a lot of a waiting game to see what our numbers fall out like in the fall. So much just kind of like the high school, we have the same problem. We don't know how many, a lot of times, 9th, 10th, 11th, or 12th graders are going to actually show up. We project, and we're pretty darn good at it, I'll be honest. We come in very, very close. But it's interesting how the numbers can change.
So along those lines, just for the parents that are tuning in, or that we can maybe cover this next week at next week's board meeting as well. But at what date do you guys start looking at those registrations? I know I already got my notifications for my kids for next year I can complete their registration online. When does HR look at those numbers again as to who's confirmed? Again, knowing that can still change. Like you said, people could, I could register my kids and then, somebody gets a job and they move away out of, over the summer. So when do you guys, how often are you looking at those numbers throughout your projecting?
We look at them pretty much constantly. We'll look at them every, 2-3 weeks. For example, kindergarten roundup is coming up very quickly. We go back in and look at kindergarten numbers as quickly as possible once they've done kindergarten roundup, because that's, as Marisa said, that's a complete unknown to us until they do the kindergarten roundup and try to see how many kindergartners are coming in. But I know registration, and I'll have to defer to Dr. Cleveland because I can't remember the exact date, but I know registration was opening, I believe, in April at the schools.
It's open now.
Yeah. But like I said, the challenge is getting people to actually complete the registration. And I know that's a challenge that our registrars have, is trying to get those numbers in. They get them into Power School. We're able to actually, in our department, I have complete access to Power School. And once they roll Power School over, I can look at Power School at any time and see the enrollment numbers.
And there is some ability to gather some data in Power School for siblings they have at home for projected kindergartners, correct? I mean, I believe as a parent, I've answered, how many younger siblings do they have at home, correct?
I think it says school age, though, like that are already in school.
Yeah, my kids are older, so I don't remember, but I could have sworn it had that ability, or might have the ability to do that to try to capture our kindergarten.
Yeah, and we rely on IT for some of that information.
Madam Chair, kind of circle back to Mr. Tripp's question. So some of the average or class sizes seem a little bit large because we add an instructional coach. We're not required to have an instructional coach, but it is part of the teaching of the teachers, how many teachers we have in that particular school. So you'll see some of the average class sizes are a little bit larger because of those, like we talked about, the support services. And that's one in particular that we add, but that number actually comes out of the actual teachers in the classroom.
It just seems alarming, Madam Chair, real alarming that I think this is why my grandkids are in a charter school now, because they're not going to be in the public school where there's 28 kids in a class. And they're going to be where the teacher pupil ratio is better for the children, especially elementary school. It's just alarming because the instructional coach isn't in that classroom all day long. And the projections are pretty accurate, I think on your part, that fourth grade are going to roll over to be fifth grade at 28.5 in this particular example. I think kindergarten and fifth grade, fourth graders becoming fifth graders are apples and oranges. I think it's a projection for the kindergarten based on registration, the conversations we're having. But I think we're going to see 28.5 kids in Colinas del Norte from fourth graders being fifth graders. That's just my opinion. But my other question is, I see zero security at the very bottom of page 2. Is that there's not security?
There is, but at the elementary level, security is allocated to security. So that allocation actually resides with them, and then they decide, which security guard will be at what school.
One thing that I would add to that, and I do certainly agree with Board Member Tripp that that's too many at a fifth grade. But it's a trade-off all of the time. And so that's why that 2 million for transportation matters. Right there is a perfect example of why it matters. And but on a positive note, when we got involved in the lawsuit, and I guess it's now been 8 years ago, one of the driving forces was where our class sizes were. And at that time, they were above all of the state numbers. And I'm not talking just 1 or 2. So we have actually made a lot of progress in getting those class sizes down over the last several years. We've made progress. It's sure not where it needs to be. And I very much agree that that's too big for a fifth grade. But there are hard choices that have to be made. But that's one of the things that certainly, in terms of the discussions with the board, where you want those priorities to be. But it's the instructional coaches are really a really important part of impacting the overall quality of instruction in that school. And so they play an important role, but is it a more important role than 28 kids in fifth grade? I understand the question. It's all a trade-off. But I want you to know we've made huge progress in terms of getting those class sizes back down under the state regulations. And this would have looked a whole lot worse if this had been a few years ago. We need to continue and are continuing to try to look at class size. It is a big factor, not only in terms of parents, it's also sometimes a factor in terms of teachers, whether they will stay or not. To your point, it's one of the primary reasons we lose a lot of kids out of the district in middle school is the numbers are too high. So it's something we're committed to moving toward. You just can't fix that overnight. But we'd love to have that money back. And so for this year, it'll be 2 million for transportation, and add on top of that another $1 million for instructional materials for textbooks that other districts are getting paid for. They're not taking it out of the classrooms. So it's if we had that 3 million, we could definitely make an impact on additional teachers in some of those classes to lower some of those numbers. We continue to work toward that goal. It's important that we do.
Thank you. Go ahead,
And just
Marisa.
to add to that and to clarify, so it's not necessarily that school will only have 3.5 teachers in fifth grade. If you take away the kindergarten from that number, they have 21 teachers to place as they see the need, because they're all grouped together. The only reason we keep kindergarten separate is we have to make sure that they have the correct number of EAs, because state requires that they have 1 EA per kindergarten class. So if the teacher, sees that there's a lower number in second grade, they can move the allocations as they need them. Those 21 are open to use through first through fifth.
When we were over the state averages, which is the only way at those times we can make our budgets work, we've added a lot of teachers. I think you shared with Kat how many new teachers we had added over the last several years. Do you happen to just recall that number? Because unfortunately I do not, but it's a significant number of teachers we have hired.
Over 3 years, we added approximately 190 positions. Most of those positions were general ed and special ed teachers.
So we're making progress is what I want you to be aware of. It's not perfect, but we're moving, and we've been moving in the right direction with that.
So I don't mean to be a pain, but I do have another question. And I was going to ask if you could go to MLK, Martin Luther King Elementary School, because Martin Luther King, and this is where the question, I guess, is do you look at it and add is my question. But I see 30.5 for fifth grade next year and 22.3 for kindergarten. So I'm wondering at what point would that be in the fall, or at what point do we add a position to a school, I guess would be my question.
Mike can
Yeah.
add that, but let me tell you, one of the challenges with it before he adds that is that in the last several years, Board Member Tripp, what we have had is nobody's there to hire. So, even if we had the ability to add some additional positions, in many cases, the bench was bare. There was no one left to hire. And we run into that every year with special ed, where we're just literally, there's nobody left to hire. So this push to grow our teacher corps through both alternative certification and to really boost up, hopefully, enrollment in our colleges of education will pay off. But I think what's important for the board to know is it won't pay off for 4 years. It's going to take that long for these people to get in the programs and get out. So we are really having to focus, and we'll do another report on that. We're really having to focus on alternative certification and doing some unique, different things so as we try to fill that gap. I'm excited, though, about the fact that there are some really major incentives to get students into the colleges of education. So in the past, what we would often say is, the bench is kind of, bare back there. But now, really, truly, there's no bench. And that's so in some cases we could have added a position, but there was not anyone even available to hire.
And we will look at the numbers throughout the year. As Mr. Chavez mentioned, as enrollment is now open, I'll start to get reports basically as often as I request from IT, and we'll look to see where there's any major fluctuations, and we'll reconvene and see if we need to look at the numbers again. We hope to have final allocations kind of set so principals have a sense of where they can hire, no later than May. And this is our first draft, and we hope to have the revised fairly soon when the federal budget is available for title. And some of those title positions are classroom size reduction teachers, so it helps to offset, some of those places where the classrooms are large.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Madam Chair, if I just make one more comment, and that is, just to this whole thing. Last year, the state of New Mexico had 1,000 classrooms that never had a teacher all year. So that's why we've seen the executive and the legislature step up, improve compensation packages, liberalize college entrance opportunities. Some students who would like to teach can have all of their expenses paid now, everything, if they go into the College of Education and maintain a good grade point average. There are a lot of things that are hoping to turn this situation around. I would have to tell you how very hard our HR department has worked to try to fill those classrooms. And I mean, they have worked really hard and trying to find people, trying to, get good people in classrooms, try different approaches to make sure those classrooms are full. And really last year we did so much better than the year before. It was a much better year. Yeah. And I think next year is going to be a better year, I think we're already seeing responses to the new compensation package, to several of the incentives. And so I think we're going to start seeing that bench grow again. And the other concern is sometimes if you don't get people who, are a good fit, then they don't stay after a year anyway. So it's really important that we get good people that are really good fit for that school, that grade level, whatever, to be able to staff our our classrooms.
And then the very last thing I wanted to mention before I take my seat is we have moved ahead with Kelly Services for substitutes. We are doing very well with them. At this point, we have a pool of approximately 171 people that they are pulling from. They have hired approximately 166 people. And this I thought was very interesting. They are projecting this week a fill rate of 88%, which is phenomenal. So we are, it is going to have an impact on the budget, just like everything else is having this next year. I know Mike just is going to smile at me here in a minute. But I will say that the fact that they have the personnel there has, working with them has been a terrific experience. They have the personnel to continually be promoting their services and looking for new hires for substitutes, and they have produced. And so we are really seeing already since spring break a difference in our classrooms and having filled classrooms. So I just wanted to let you guys know that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
What are the requirements for a substitute teacher? And what are the, what's the payment? What's the salary or for the day rate?
Well, the requirements, they have to now apply through Kelly Services. You can have anything from a high school diploma on up to PhD. You get a different rate depending on where you're at on that scale. So if you have a degree, you get a little bit more money. If you have a certificate, a teaching certificate, you get more money. If you're a long-term sub, you get more money. And it ranges anywhere from about $100 a day to about $130 a day. It will increase a little bit after this summer because of the moving to the $15 an hour, but it'll go up about $5 a day at each of those steps. So it'll range from $105 to about $135 a day to be a substitute teacher. But the nice thing with Kelly is they do offer benefits. So these folks have access to medical benefits through Kelly Services. They can work all summer if they want. If they want to be a temporary doing something else, they certainly can. And the nice thing about Kelly is also that we've been able to procure temporary positions for open clerical spots in our district, which we weren't able to do before because theoretically substitutes are not able to substitute for anything but a classroom or an instructional person in a classroom, an EA or a teacher. So we would have to really jump through hoops to temporarily fill secretarial clerical positions. And of course, that's what Kelly does. So they are able to give us or work with us and supply those people. So it's a good service. It's working out well for us.
How does
How low were we on fill at the worst?
We were never terrible. We were somewhere in the 60 to 70% range. I mean, we weren't doing horribly, but 60% is, not great. And it's difficult, for the schools when, 40% of their vacancies are going unfilled. So this is getting us a much higher fill rate.
And when they're unfilled, what happened was then they would go to the teacher on their planning period and would say, can you fill in here? Or they would get an educational assistant and would say, can you fill in here?
Right.
Or sending multiple classes of students to the cafeteria or library. I think maybe it would be beneficial to do an update on this. I want to kind of refocus us back to the budget, not to take away from this subject, but just to keep us on track for the finance committee work session. I think this is relevant, but I think it could, we could spend more time on it, especially with changing things over to Kelly Services, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair.
Chair, Dr. Cleveland, members of the Finance Committee. My name's Heather Gabaldon. I'm the Director of Finance, and tonight I am going to briefly go over kind of the highlights of the salary and benefits budget for the upcoming school year. So,
Ms. Gabaldon, if I could stop you just for 1 second, since we don't have our screens here for those following along up here. We're now under salary and benefits and average raises by employee.
Oh,
I just did a search in my Google Drive for average raises and it came up, if that helps.
Okay, sorry, Ms. Gabaldon, go ahead.
okay, so this first document that I'm sharing is basically a snapshot of the average raises by different categories of our employees. And these are existing employees that are paid out of the operational fund. So if you look at the top three, those are the teachers, the educational assistants, and our ancillary folks. And their average raise percentage are 17% for the teachers and educational assistants and 16% for the ancillary. So the way that worked is that if their 10.3% raise didn't get them up to the state minimums, then they were placed at the state minimum, which in these cases gave them a much higher raise than the 10.3%. Just going down the chart, librarians and assistants received an average of a 14% raise. The next grouping are the employees at the school sites. And with the exception of the secretaries and clerical school positions at the very bottom, everybody pretty much got the 10.3%. The secretaries, you see 26%, and that's primarily due to having to place them at the $15 minimum. Going down, custodial, 11%, maintenance, 10%, security shows 9%, and that is because they went from they lost 2 days in their contract for next year. They actually received a 10.3% raise on their daily rate, but their contract went from 192 to 190, correct? Yes. And then district office employees received the 10%. So overall, the average for employees paid out of the operational fund at the bottom is a 16% raise from last year. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I did have one question. I know there was a lot of confusion about how the legislative mandates would be implemented. And like Dr. Cleveland had stated earlier, that even there was confusion from the state as well. So my question is at one point I had heard that it wasn't necessarily meant to be those compounding raises, meaning that if I'm a step 3 teacher, I would get the 4% as a step 1, a 3% for step 2, and then the additional 3% for the extended learning program. So did we choose to do that as a school district, or is that how it was intended to be implemented, is my question.
I think I will answer that, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
It was our interpretation. And so what we decided to do was, the difference between 10% and 10.33%, we thought that it would benefit the employee just to give them that incremental amount. And it was well worth giving them that incremental amount rather than maybe getting into some type of conflict with the union or employees. And especially the fact that inflation is really skyrocketing and is anticipated to go up. Additionally, we are competing specifically with APS. And so the more that we can give to our employees will benefit our district.
Thank you. And the other, I guess, historical portion of where that question came from is I think some teachers believed, or there was going to be a compression issue, if you want to, I guess, call it that, from a step 1 teacher to a step 3 teacher if it wasn't implemented in that fashion, correct? Where a step 1 teacher was going to get a much more sizable raise than a step 3 teacher who had maybe been here longer. Is that accurate or no?
Because the way that the state implemented this plan, you are going to have, some of that compression with a year 1 teacher compared to maybe a year 20 teacher. And so when you change a system as dramatically as the state did, you're going to have differences. And that's why, Heather put this sheet together to demonstrate that the average salary is going to increase. So it is quite different depending on where you are in years of service.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, Gary.
Heather, I'm wondering how many employees, the number of employees are at less than $15 an hour?
Currently,
Yeah, currently.
this current school year, it would probably, and you guys can probably answer better, but I'm assuming it's probably all of our EMDC, safe employees. I don't know numbers.
Yeah.
Board member Tripp, right now, below $15 an hour would be all of our custodial staff, all of our EAs, all of our bus attendants, and I'm forgetting, and all of our clerical staff are all significant. The clerical staff are significantly below $15 an hour. So there are approximately 320 EAs. So we're probably talking close to 500 or more staff members who are going to have to be moved up. And as you can see from this sheet, EAs are going up an average of 14%. Heather, I'm sorry,
17.
I can't see that.
17.
17%. Counselors or custodial staff. I mean, as you can see across the board, across the sheet here, people are going up a significant amount. And I just do want to point out, and I would just like to, I kind of want to thank all of these people as well, because there's been a significant amount of work this year that has gone into calculating all of this. Marisa has finished so that we can have this ready for the union tomorrow night. She has already finished all of the salary schedules, which included taking each and every current employee and finding out where they land on the new salary schedule. That's an incredible amount of work. And Heather has done just an amazing amount of work too, to try to figure this out. But I will tell you, to your question, we have people getting anywhere from a 19% raise at level 1 down to about a 9% raise. So you are going to see a significant difference in what people receive going to this new minimum. But that happened the last time we went to the minimums as well. And it's just the nature of the beast. The state is not going to fund us to give everybody a 20% raise. They're just not going to, they can't afford to do that. So that's going to be something that I will work with the union on. And we will be working hard with them to come to a resolution on that. But to answer your question, Board Member Tripp, a significant number of people had to be moved up to the $15 level. And in our district, because we have quite a bit of turnover, we have a lot of people that come in new. We have a lot of our folks at the very top of the salary schedules.
I think that Board Member Morgan has been trying to ask a question, and I want to just add one thing back to Madam Chair, your comment. In the earlier part of the legislative session, there was discussion about additional funding for compaction that would raise those folks at those more senior level. That never materialized. And so instead we got the package that we got, which was a good package, but in compaction itself was not targeted. And that was a discussion earlier in the year. The other comment I have is that, we're bringing this, but we are in negotiations. And so this also has to be negotiated, or have we completed that yet? And so, that is, we still have that phase to go through, but this is obviously what the administration is proposing. I'm sorry.
Board Member.
Dr. Cleveland, you're fine. But my question was, the category that says educational assistance, does that include the special education assistance as well?
It's all educational assistance. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Yes, sir.
And of our assistants, about 80-90% are special ed.
Yes, sir.
That's almost.
We have very few. So we have the kindergarten, we have the kindergarten educational assistants. So each elementary has maybe 4 or 5 of those. Each elementary school has a couple general educational assistants. The high schools have a couple, and then the remainder of them are all special educational assistants. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. I apologize for interrupting.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, next chart is that's a number 2.
It looks like the
Salaries
screens are
by
working
function.
again, by the way.
Salaries by function. Okay. Oh, that's pretty chart.
Okay, so this chart basically breaks out the salaries and benefits by the functions that you are becoming more familiar with in David's presentations. I'll briefly go through them. 1,000 instruction function, that's 67%, and that is instruction, including the activities dealing directly with the interaction between teachers and students provided for students in the school classroom, and that's going to be our teachers and all of our educational assistants. It used to include subs, but now that subs are not employees and are contractors, it is not included in this number anymore. 2,100 support services for students, that accounts for 10%, and those, the 2,100 are expenditures. Expenditures in this function are the activities designed to assess and improve the well-being of students. This includes all of our ancillary employees, including counselors, social workers, diags, SLPs, OTs, PTs, and nurses. In the 2,200 function, which is support services instruction, that accounts for 1%. That is basically our librarians and media services. Let's see, going down. Oops. In the 2,300 function, support services for general administration, that's 3%. And that is expenditures in this function are the activities concerned with establishing and administering policy for operating the school district. This includes expenditures for the Board of Education, Office of the Superintendent, and other district leadership. So that's many of the district office executive directors, and other staff in the following departments: Superintendent, Cabinet, Student Services, CNI, Special Services, and our communication departments. 2,400 is the support services for school administration. That's at 6%. Those are, that's the expenditures in this function are the activities concerned with the overall administrative responsibility for schools. That's going to be our principals, assistant principals, and clerical school staff. Function 2,500 is support services, central services. Expenditures in this function are the activities that support other administrative and instructional functions. So that includes our finance departments, HR, IT, and RADA departments. Function 2,600 is 7%. Expenditures in this function are the activities concerned with keeping the physical plant open, comfortable, and safe for use, including keeping grounds, buildings, and equipment in effective working condition and state of repair. This includes our facilities and security departments, including all maintenance and custodial workers. And then the last one is 2,700, support services, transportation. As we've been mentioning all night, this really shouldn't even be in here in the operational, but it is. And so this is the amount that we have to move over and pay out of operational for the bus drivers, and that's 1%. Just one thing to note that, a lot of times PED classifies, direct instruction as just the 1,000 function, but really the folks that are in the 2,100 function, the support services, all of our ancillary, those folks are working pretty much one-on-one with students as well. So we always think that those should be included in direct contact with the students. So really 77% of our salaries and budget go to employees that are working directly with students. Any questions on this?
Doesn't look like it. Thank you.
Okay, and then the last document is just a snapshot of some other funding that the district receives outside of the SEG that pays for also a significant amount of our salaries and benefits. And I've just highlighted, I think there's seven of them, kind of our largest ones. So Medicaid, we have about $3.3 million in salary and benefits. And this goes to pay for all of the district's nurses and health EAs, one special ed teacher, one OT, 2 social workers, 2 SLPs, a 504 manager, and a percentage of the district office employees that manage the Medicaid program. Fund 24101, which is Title I, about 1.65 million. And that goes to pay for the salaries of approximately 40 teachers at title schools. 24106, IDEA B, 2.3 million. And that goes for the salaries of approximately 55 special education teachers. 27149, the pre-K grant, 1.4 million. The salaries and benefits of the various preschool teachers, NEAs at Shining Stars Preschool. 13,000, transportation, 2.1 million goes for paying salaries and benefits in our transportation department. And then of course the other 1.8 million that gets paid out of the operational. We do have 2 programs, the 23101 SAFE program, that's our before and after school program for our students. That's about 1.1 million, and that's pretty much self-funded by charging the families of the students. And then 23102 is our EMDC program, and that's our daycare for our staff, $300,000, and that is also self-funded through charging fees to employees. There's many others that, other funds that pay 1 or 2 employees here and there, but those are kind of the larger ones. Any questions on that?
Just a comment that we may receive more Medicaid funding next year. They are liberalizing, which has just been a huge need, the ability to bill for children who do not have a disability but have serious behavioral issues and need help. And for a long time, we've been needing to be able to address the needs of non-special ed children. And so that is being adjusted, and there's some other areas. So we're hopeful that we may be able to bill for more than we have billed in the past for Medicaid and meet some of these needs that we've not been able to meet before. That's something that's pretty exciting because we've needed that, particularly that help for that child that may not be in special ed that needs services as well. So just want to let you know that's kind of a bright spot that we see coming down the road.
Okay, Madam Chair, that concludes our presentation for the 22-23 school year. Certainly like to take this time to thank the finance and the budget team for all the work and me constantly bugging them. Are you done yet?
Are we there yet?
Yeah. So,
Great job. You did great.
We stand for questions.
You all did a great job, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, just a comment. Thank you for all your effort. It really, especially Mr. Vihel, it really helped me understand some things that I didn't before. So I appreciate that.
And then we throw all sorts of random comments and questions at you guys. You guys did a great job. So thank you so much.
Any other remarks before we're ready to adjourn? Okay, we'll cover advanced planning quickly. So we will have the regular board meeting and preliminary budget approval next Monday, 4/25/2022. It'll be at 5:30 here in the boardroom. And with that, if I'll check for questions one last time. No, everybody's good. Yeah, and thank you all again for all of your hard work and patience with us. We appreciate it. And with that, this meeting will be adjourned. Thank you.
That's pretty good on time, people. That was good.